Washington, D.C., this is Middle East Focus.
Hello, and welcome to Middle East Focus, a weekly podcast on regional affairs and U.S. policy, produced by the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. I'm Mohammed Mahmoud, Senior Fellow at MEI and the Director of the Climate and Water Program. With 2023 almost certainly looking to be the hottest year on record following an unprecedentedly warm summer in the Northern Hemisphere, it has become undeniable that the effects of climate change have progressively intensified to an alarming degree over the last few years. As such, with the year drawing to a close, all eyes are on COP28 taking place in the UAE, as the world comes together to reinvigorate efforts towards accelerated climate mitigation action that will limit future global warming to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, a benchmark target that may already be at risk of not being met. This year's COP28 program covers a number of themes that will appeal to the interests of a diverse range of stakeholders with the intent of driving action on multiple priorities that can expeditiously respond to the current severity of climate change. We asked several of MEI's Climate and Water Program scholars to offer their insights on topics and issues associated with the various themes of the COP28 agenda with the MENA region in mind. Following COP28's opening and the high-level World Climate Action Summit, the first thematic day will be on health, recovery, and peace. Megan Ferrando expands on why climate financing is critical for countries experiencing conflict to meet their peace and climate resilience goals.
To me, one of the topics I will particularly be looking out for at COP28 is the discussion on climate finance for countries in conflict. We know that as an international community, we're already falling way short of keeping our pledge of dedicating $100 billion per year to climate finance. On top of this, climate finance goes much more to countries that are not in conflict. Research via the UN's climate security mechanism showed that the more fragile a country is, the less climate finance it receives. Research by the International Crisis Group showed that countries affected by both climate change and conflict receive, on average, 1/3 of the climate financing per capita than countries that are free of conflict. And this is problematic because countries in conflict are often the most vulnerable to climate shocks. People often lack the means to prepare for climatic events, so think of droughts, fires, earthquakes, floods. Civilian infrastructure is often damaged or destroyed due to conflict, which leads to dysfunctional basic services like water, electricity, healthcare. And all of this makes a climate shock even more destructive to people, because people lack the financial, the economic, the structural means to bounce back. As a consequence, in fragile and conflict-affected countries, extreme weather events affect 3 times as many people annually compared to other countries. So there's a positive correlation between fragility to conflict and fragility to climate change. People in fragile and conflict contexts are hit harder by climate change, more often and more intensely, and they have fewer means to cope. But as I said, these same countries receive much less climate finance compared to other countries. And that's for a variety of reasons, which all make sense. For example, one main reason is that climate mitigation and adaptation rely on longer-term actions and investments. So think of the installation of sustainable water infrastructure, or on working together with farmers on climate-smart agriculture. But you often don't have these longer-term guarantees and this time frame in conflict, because it's really difficult to know whether a conflict context will allow for this effort to be sustained continuously over an extended period of time. The way climate finance is set up right now requires regularity and predictability, which are 2 things that conflict contexts just cannot offer. And this discourages climate finance institutions. And I think a second main reason why countries that are in conflict receive much less climate finance is that climate actors generally work through a country's public institutions, which can either be dysfunctional during conflict or can actually be part of the warring parties. There are many more challenges, for example, around information management, around access, and the issues of corruption. But I think the key mismatch and the basic mismatch that we have right now is that the climate finance instruments that we have take on this longer-term approach, generally via government actors, while what is actually needed in a conflict is a more flexible local approach, which takes into account volatility and unpredictability. That's why I'm going to follow with great interest what happens at COP, because for the very first time, there will be a specific thematic day dedicated to the link between conflict and climate. It will be called the Relief, Recovery and Peace Day. And of course, the real challenge will be changing words into action, as is always the case. But the fact that conflict has a space in the discussion for the first time is a good first step. Two things that I hope will come out of this day, of COP in general, is first of all, concrete ideas for new, flexible climate finance instruments, which are able to take into account this volatility and this risk of conflict contexts. And second of all, more ideas for actual, concrete, on-the-ground collaboration between actors from different sectors, between climate actors, development actors, humanitarian workers, peace builders, to strengthen intersectoral collaboration. I mean, at the moment, this collaboration exists on paper. These actors in reality really work in silo, which is also due to the fact that the funding is organized in silo. If you want to work on the link between climate and peace, you will need actual joint projects and actual joint research carried out by climate, peace, development, humanitarian actors. And you will need international donors who are willing to make this investment into funding new ways of working.
On the third day of COP28, the thematic program shifts to energy, industry, and a just transition. Andre Covatario explains the differences and pathways towards achieving future goals of energy security and energy decarbonization.
When it comes to the energy sector, I think COP28 will also focus on the nexus or intersection, depends on how we define this, between energy security and energy decarbonization. After many crises and shocks, including the pandemic and the energy price situation and the energy war started last year by Russia, some experts are considering that the two objectives, ensuring energy security and decarbonizing our economies, are perfectly aligned. And I tend to disagree. I do agree that the end goal of a higher energy security level, therefore a higher energy independence level at domestic or regional levels, facilitated by renewable and decentralized generation, is synonymous with a decarbonized energy system. The destination is the same, the journeys are very different though, because the pathways to ensuring the security of supply and decarbonizing economies face very different challenges. First, the energy security concept is continuously evolving, and we've discussed extensively about this. It's not only about having own resources or having physical or commercial ties with countries that have an abundance of these resources, and don't get me wrong, current needs must be met. But nowadays, energy security is also about mining and refining of rare earth metals and critical raw materials, and about the capacity of manufacturing clean technologies, from wind blades to solar panels to batteries, solutions that will unlock a more decentralized energy generation. In other words, the energy geopolitics of tomorrow will be less tense than they are today. But the road towards that is full of geopolitical and trade challenges, given the monopoly on critical raw materials and on a significant part of the clean technology manufacturing sector. On the other hand, as a result of these overlapping crises, clean technologies and their supply chains, and in general the cost structure of green solutions, have also recorded some setbacks. And the reasons for that vary from limits of supply chains, global inflation, and high interest rates for developers, once again availability of critical raw materials, or permitting issues. And while we've seen evolution last year, especially on the solar panels front, the pace of renewable deployment is still not high enough, and the costs are still posing some issues, especially in some parts of the world. And because of that, we see decarbonization ambitions being revised, both at government's level as well as at corporates level. We've seen that in the UK's pushback of its 2030 EV goals, now 2035 targets. We've seen that on some oil majors that have decreased their decarbonization ambitions, and so on. And these two arguments, the need to ensure a high energy security level with its changing definition, while having an immediate solution to some bottlenecks in renewable deployment, have determined some voices to talk about relying on fossil fuel-based energy for longer. But as we know, this is not a solution, as the climate emergency becomes more pressing from one year to another, and the financial needs to cope with that are also increasing as the time left to reach our objectives shrinks very fast. Therefore, I do expect some energy debates at COP to be focused on how to reach these two objectives, security of supply, and decarbonization of our economies, both on the short and long term, especially given the global economic context, relatively fragile one at the moment.
Following the midway point of the conference, the fifth thematic day of COP28 focuses on youth, children, and education. Nishad Shafi talks about some of the uncertainties and opportunities surrounding youth participation and advocacy at COP28.
As we step into COP28, a big question is around youth participation and the youth's role at COP28. It's going to be quite an interesting COP. The COP presidency has put forward a lot of efforts to have youth at the forefront, announcing the Youth Climate Champion under the Minister, Her Excellency Shema, and also funding 100 young people from developing nations to attend COP28, which is exciting to start with. But a lot of questions asked around real youth advocacy and opportunity for other young people beyond this funding from the COP28 presidency, how it's going to work, how is it going to be impacted. There are a lot of uncertainties about Western perspective, if I want to say, on youth advocacy and climate march at COP28 in UAE, given the context, how the region, same like what happened in last year in Sharm el Sheikh, they were in the allowed to have any public protest marches in the country. Same would happen here in UAE as well. But I've been hearing a lot of positive things. There would be some spaces given for that sort of public marches to be in line with young people's aspiration to make their voices heard. Given said that, there are also issues with representation. I mean, people have been celebrating that young people were very much represented from the Arab region at COP27 last year in Egypt. But the fact is, it was not representation, and the mass of the Arab people who was claimed to be were all from Egypt. So there was not uniquely represented a region which is going to have Honduras impact of climate change in the coming days, and already many of the impacts of climate change are very much visible, from temperature rise to flash flooding, etc. So this is another key issue about representation. Many of the youth organizations from the West easily get access to UAE, but the young people within the region, due to current political situation, are still facing, not getting necessary visa or entry permit to come to COP. And also another big fact is funding and having access to badges. All this climate advocacy and climate movement we hear on a day-to-day basis are doing quite a great job. But you go onto the grassroots to look what's happening within the Arab youth climate movement, they're still struggling. Access to their badges, access to funds to come to COP at UAE or any other event is still a dream for many young people, even though they are doing extraordinary work at their own country levels, giving them the voices for people from Libya, for example, who went through a great impact of climate change due to flash flooding early this year, forest fires in Lebanon or Turkey. How are we supposed to bring these young people to share their own stories rather than celebrity young activists talking about them with no much impact on their respective countries? So I think there is a big gap between representation, and that's going to be quite evident again in UAE. That's one of the reasons we started Arab Youth for COP. This is an initiative started since last year. We were able to send 5 young people to Egypt. And this year to UAE, we are sending 10 young people from the Arab region, from countries which are least represented, from Libya to Yemen to Palestine, etc., would be represented. So the idea of the program is to give space for young people from the region who are facing the dire consequence of climate change on a day-to-day basis, unlike our celebrity activists who only talk about it but never experienced. So this is a serious issue moving forward for COP28. I'm glad the COP presidency has taken youth issues at the forefront. We would wait and need to watch how would that have impact at the COP itself. We are not very far away from COP, with 3 weeks ahead. We would really look into how the COP presidency within the youth the constituency would be supporting original young people's involvement, not only advocacy from the point of view on governance and policy, and not to forget being part of the national negotiation discussions. So fingers crossed. There's a lot of optimism around youth, but I'm still a bit skeptical. But also at the time, optimism is on the high. How this COP would be really powering young people. So we look forward for a COP, probably not anymore soon to the region, but back-to-back 2 COPs in the MENA region would have been a great opportunity, really engaging young people from a very strategic, from very technical point of view, rather than considering them as youth advocacy as a form of youth washing. but really working on them. But COP presidency had a lot of promises, and I hope they deliver. Some of them have been done, but I hope during the COP things would be evident if we see young people's participation or beyond the youth washing.
On the penultimate thematic day of COP28, the topic shifts to nature, land use, and oceans. Raha Hakim Devar shares her perspective on the role that nature-based solutions can play to tackle water and environmental challenges.
As we approach COP28, the spotlight is on the MENA region to showcase its commitment to sustainability and climate action. COP28's commitment to making water a focal point of its climate agenda underscores the urgent need for innovative approaches in addressing environmental challenges. The presidency team this year will elevate water up to the climate discourse through three key areas, including conserving and restoring freshwater ecosystems. For these key areas, COP28 aims to bring more than 30 countries to join the Freshwater Challenge, which is targeting the restoration of 300,000 kilometers of rivers and 350 million hectares of wetlands by 2030. And this amounts to more or less 30% of the global total of wetlands. Now, the MENA region, which is generally characterized by arid climates and scarce water resources, is facing unparalleled challenges in water security and sustainability. It's stated that 6 of the 10 most water scarce countries in the world are found in this region. While at the same time, many of the cities are also facing unprecedented flooding following intense and what seems to be very atypical rainfall events. Nature based solutions, rooted in the principles of ecosystem management, can offer a promising path forward. Implementing green infrastructure such as rainfall harvesting systems and sustainable land management practices can certainly enhance water availability and reduce the dependence on conventional water resources. Investing in ecosystems such as forests, mangroves, and wetlands can also act as natural buffers, absorbing excess water during floods, replenishing groundwater, and providing habitat for flora and fauna. Preserving and restoring these ecosystems is not just an environmental imperative, it's also a safeguard for the livelihoods of communities across the region. So, the Freshwater Challenge not only underscores the severity of the issues faced by freshwater ecosystems, but it also offers a concrete roadmap for international collaboration. The restoration targets are not merely a numerical target, but a holistic approach to ecosystem conservation. It is an acknowledgement that the health of our rivers and wetlands is interconnected with broader environmental concerns, ranging from biodiversity conservation to climate resilience and water security. Achieving these targets would not only enhance water security, but also contribute to mitigating the impacts of climate change on vulnerable ecosystems and communities. The MENA region has a unique opportunity to leverage nature based solutions in tandem with the COP28 Water Champions Initiative. As we anticipate the discussions at COP28, I hope that more countries rally behind the Freshwater Challenge as a pathway to a more sustainable and resilient future across the region and globally.
The last thematic day ahead of the final negotiations period of COP28 is dedicated to food, agriculture, and water. Malaka Taib discusses some of the best practices that can improve the efficiency and productivity of the key linkages between agriculture, food security, and water.
The MENA region faces extreme water scarcity, which is exacerbated by climate change. When we talk about agriculture, for instance, agriculture consumes a significant amount of water, and there's a pressing need to adopt sustainable practices that reduce water use and enhance food security simultaneously. This topic specifically, when we talk about agriculture, food security, and water, aligns with COP28's objectives by addressing sustainable resource management, climate resilience, and adaptation strategies in agriculture, which is, of course, vital for the MENA region's survival and prosperity. But when we talk about the issues related to this topic, is specifically the overuse of traditional irrigation methods that lead to high water wastage. And we can see it in different crops management and so on. So I would argue for this section is to adopt innovative technologies, like for instance, drip irrigation, which can dramatically reduce water usage and, of course, increase the crop yields. The desired outcome would be for COP28 to recognize the urgency of water issues in the MENA region and also to support the adoption of smart agricultural technologies. This could, for instance, include setting up a fund to assist farmers in transitioning to more efficient irrigation systems. And this can be super helpful, especially when we talk about small scale farmers in different areas around the MENA region, for instance, in Tunisia, or also creating a platform for knowledge exchange on best practices in water management. This can actually help and raise awareness on the best practices linked to water management and push for the knowledge exchange among different stakeholders, especially when we talk about small scale or large scale farmers in different areas around the region. If we're talking about, for instance, Libya and also Egypt, but also taking the best practices and examples from, for instance, Morocco. So, for example, if we want to draw on existing applications, it's important to stress on the potential of reviving and modernizing ancient water harvesting technologies, which have been, for instance, applied in countries like Morocco and other parts of the region. These systems can be integrated with the existing now or the developed modern technology to sustainably manage scarce water resources for agriculture. In terms of actionable steps, suggesting or pushing for practical steps such as providing subsidies for farmers to switch to water efficient technologies, or also focusing on research institutions by investing in research and development for new agricultural practices suited to arid and semi arid climates of the MENA region, but also encouraging regional cooperation to share successful strategies.
And that concludes this week's episode. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in and to our production team for their work on this episode. For more information on topics like this, you can follow all of MEI's coverage of climate and water on our website at www.mei.edu. You can subscribe to Middle East Focus on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast providers. And you can follow MEI on Twitter and YouTube, and subscribe to our email newsletters for the latest analysis and information on upcoming events. I'm Mohammed Mahmoud. We will see you all next time.
This has been a presentation of the Middle East Institute. To support MEI's programs and podcasts, please donate at www.mei.edu. Thank you for your support.